The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber opened with a deep rumble that echoed through the vast space. Ambassador Jake Morrison walked through those doors knowing it would be his last time. His black diplomatic uniform felt heavier today, weighted down by 3 years of failed negotiations and broken promises. Behind him, Captain Lisa Hayes and Dr. Peter Walsh followed in silence, their faces showing the same tired determination that had marked every human representative for months. The chamber itself was a monument to alien arrogance. 12 different species had their designated areas, each designed to showcase their particular biology and supposed superiority. The Vorthak delegation sat in their chittering cluster, their insect-like forms clicking disapproval at everything humans suggested. The crystalline Kytheriana reflected the chamber's lights in cold, dismissive patterns. The hegemony representatives lounged in their elevated platform, looking down on everyone else with barely concealed contempt. At the center of it all sat Speaker Zelthan, a being so ancient that his species had forgotten what planet they originally came from. His wrinkled gray skin and 6 eyes had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, and those eyes now looked at Morrison with the same indifference they might show a particularly boring insect. Morrison took his place at the human podium, a simple metal stand that looked pathetic compared to the elaborate alien seating arrangements. The other species had made sure humans got the worst spot in the chamber, positioned so that Morrison had to crane his neck to see half the delegates. It was just another small insult in a long list of deliberate slights. The human delegation requests permission to present evidence of continued attacks on civilian vessels in the Kepler sector, Morrison said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. He had practiced this speech dozens of times, knowing it would likely be his last chance to make the council listen to reason. The response was immediate and predictable. Councillor Vex Morn of the hegemony made a dismissive gesture with one of his 4 arms. "More human complaints about their inadequate security arrangements," he announced in his booming voice. "Perhaps if humans spent less time whining and more time learning proper defensive techniques, these issues would resolve themselves." Several alien species made sounds that their translators rendered as laughter. Morrison felt his jaw tighten but continued speaking. In the past 6 months, 17 human civilian transports have been destroyed by pirates operating from bases in unclaimed space. These same pirates have been selling stolen cargo to hegemony traders and using Vorthak communication networks to coordinate their attacks. The accusation caused an uproar among the aliens. The Vorthak began their angry chittering, while the hegemony delegates rose from their seats in outrage. Speaker Zelthan raised one ancient hand for silence, but his 6 eyes showed no interest in hearing Morrison's evidence. Dr. Walsh leaned forward in his observer seat, watching the familiar pattern play out once again. As humanity's chief xenobiologist, he had spent 15 years studying these species, learning their customs, understanding their psychology. What he had learned was that they saw humans as useful servants at best, annoying insects at worst. They had never considered humanity an equal partner in galactic affairs. Captain Hayes sat beside Walsh, her military bearing rigid with controlled anger. She had lost friends in those pirate attacks, good people who died because the Council refused to authorize proper security measures in human space. Her hand unconsciously moved to the datapad containing casualty reports, pictures of destroyed ships and intercepted communications proving alien involvement in the attacks. "The human accusations are baseless and insulting," declared the Kytherian representative, its crystalline form shifting colors to display what their translators called righteous indignation. "We have observed this species for 100 years. They show promise, but lack the wisdom that comes with age. Their requests for expanded territory and military rights demonstrate their aggressive nature." Morrison had heard this argument countless times. Every human request for basic defensive rights was labeled as aggression. Every attempt to protect human colonies was called territorial expansion. The aliens had created a perfect system where humans were expected to contribute labor, resources, and expertise while accepting whatever scraps the council chose to throw their way. "We ask only for the right to defend our people," Morrison said, his voice steady despite the frustration building inside him. "These are not territorial claims. We want permission to establish security stations in space lanes where human ships travel most frequently. We want the right to pursue pirates who attack our vessels. We want the basic protections that every other species in this council takes for granted." The chamber fell silent for a moment, and Morrison allowed himself to hope that finally, after 3 years of patient diplomacy, the aliens might listen to reason. Instead, Speaker Zelthan's response crushed that hope completely. "The human species has been part of galactic civilization for merely 1 century. The ancient being said, his voice carrying the weight of eons. Other species have earned their positions through millennia of service and sacrifice. The hegemony conquered 12 systems before gaining council recognition. The Kytheriana spent 3,000 years perfecting their crystal technology. The Vorthak created the most efficient communication network in known space." Morrison knew where this was heading, but let the speaker continue. "Humans have contributed useful labor and showed adequate technical skills, but they have not earned the rights they demand. Perhaps another century of faithful service will teach your species the proper respect for galactic order. Until then, the Council finds human requests excessive and inappropriate." The gavel came down with a sound like thunder, and Morrison felt something break inside him. Not his resolve, but his last remaining faith in the possibility of working within the system. Around him, aliens made satisfied sounds as they prepared to return to their normal business of dividing up the galaxy among themselves. Morrison straightened his shoulders and gathered his materials from the podium. His voice, when he spoke, was calm and clear, carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "Then humanity formally withdraws from all council proceedings, effective immediately." The words hung in the air like a challenge none of the aliens understood. They had grown so accustomed to human compliance that the concept of human independence seemed impossible. Morrison walked toward the chamber doors, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Hayes and Walsh rose from their seats and followed him, their own steps adding to the rhythm of departure. Behind them, confused alien voices began asking questions, but the 3 humans did not stop or turn around. They walked through those massive doors and into a future that would reshape the galaxy in ways none of the proud alien species could possibly imagine. 3 months had passed since Ambassador Morrison walked out of the Galactic Council chamber, and the aliens were beginning to notice something strange. The busy hum of human activity that had filled spaceports across the galaxy for decades was growing quieter each day. Docking bays that once overflowed with human cargo ships now stood empty, their berths collecting dust while alien merchants wondered where their most reliable business partners had gone. Commander Ray Johnson stood in the control center of New Geneva Station watching the final preparations for humanity's largest evacuation in history. Outside the observation windows, human cargo vessels moved in perfect formation, loading equipment and personnel with military precision. The station had been humanity's biggest trading hub in neutral space, processing millions of tons of cargo every month and employing over 50,000 people from a dozen different species. The alien workers had been given generous severance packages and job placement assistance, but most seemed too shocked to understand what was happening. They had grown comfortable with the steady work and fair treatment that human employers provided. Now they watched in confusion as their human colleagues systematically dismantled operations that had taken 30 years to build. Zephyrian Merchant Caltef scuttled across the station's main concourse on his 6 legs, his mandibles clicking with agitation. He had built his fortune on human shipping contracts, moving exotic goods through dangerous space lanes that only human pilots seemed willing to navigate. His business depended on the reliability and skill of human crews who could deliver cargo on time, regardless of pirates, spatial anomalies, or hostile alien territories. "Commander Johnson," Caltef called out through his translator device, his voice tinged with desperate hope. "Surely we can negotiate new terms. I offer double rates for continued service. Triple rates if necessary? Your ships are the backbone of interstellar commerce in this sector? Johnson paused in his inspection of evacuation schedules to look at the alien merchant. He had worked with Caltech for 8 years and considered him one of the more honest traders in the galaxy. The Zephyrian had always paid on time and never tried to cheat human crews out of their wages. But orders were orders, and those orders came directly from Earth. I appreciate the offer, but we're consolidating all operations closer to home, Johnson replied politely. We'll be transferring your existing contracts to other shipping companies. They should be able to maintain most of your current routes. Caltech's translator made sounds that indicated extreme distress. Other companies lose half their ships to pirates in the Outer Rim. They take 3 times longer to complete deliveries. They charge fees for services your people included in standard contracts. Without human shipping, my business will collapse within a year. Johnson felt sympathy for the alien merchant, but he had seen the classified reports from Earth. This withdrawal was not just about leaving the Council. It was about something much bigger, something that required every human citizen to return home immediately. I'm sorry, but the decision is final. Earth Command has recalled all personnel and assets. Similar conversations were happening across the galaxy as human operations shut down with startling efficiency. On Mining Station Kepler 7, Captain Susan Price supervised the removal of equipment that had taken decades to install. The station monitored dangerous gravitational anomalies that could tear ships apart without warning. For 20 years, human scientists had tracked these phenomena and warned passing vessels about safe routes through the system. The alien governments had always viewed these stations as convenient early warning systems, never bothering to learn how the monitoring equipment worked or train their own people to operate it. They simply expected humans to continue providing the service indefinitely, taking for granted the complex calculations and round-the-clock vigilance that kept thousands of ships safe every year. Dr. Sarah Collins, the station's chief scientist, downloaded the last of their research data into secure storage units. 20 years of observations, mathematical models, and predictive algorithms that had prevented countless disasters were being packed away like old furniture. The aliens had never asked for copies of this data, apparently assuming it would always be available when they needed it. Are we really just going to let them figure this out on their own? Asked Lieutenant Ben Parker, one of the station's younger officers. He had spent 3 years learning to read the complex sensor arrays that detected spatial distortions long before they became dangerous. Our job was to protect ships passing through this system, Collins replied, sealing the last data container. When we leave, that job ends. If the aliens want to maintain these stations, they're welcome to try. Back on Earth, Director Alan Brooks coordinated the massive logistical operation from a command center deep beneath the Pacific, holographic. Displays showed the movement of every human vessel in the galaxy as they converged on Earth like streams flowing toward a lake. The scale of the operation amazed even the humans organizing it. Over 2 million human citizens lived and worked beyond the Sol system. They operated mining facilities on hostile worlds, research stations in dangerous regions of space, trading posts on alien planets, and diplomatic missions throughout Council territory. Each person had to be contacted, transported, and relocated without disrupting the careful timing of the overall withdrawal. The aliens initially celebrated humanity's departure. Council sessions became more efficient without human voices raising uncomfortable questions about pirate attacks, territorial disputes, and trade inequalities. The remaining species quickly divided abandoned human territories among themselves, arguing over mining rights and commercial zones with barely concealed greed. Finally, declared Councillor Vex Morn of the Hegemony during one session, we can focus on important matters without constant interruptions from an immature species. His forearms gestured dismissively as he outlined plans to claim 3 former human mining operations for his own government. The Vorthek delegation chittered in agreement, while calculating how much profit they could extract from human trade routes. The Kithariana began planning to strip useful technology from abandoned human research facilities. Speaker Zelthan nodded approvingly as the remaining species demonstrated the kind of civilized cooperation he preferred, but as weeks passed and the last human transport ships disappeared into hyperspace, something unexpected began to happen. The galaxy grew quieter in ways the aliens had not anticipated. Communication networks carried less traffic without human ships constantly requesting updates and clearances. Space lanes that had buzzed with activity for decades became eerily empty. Most unsettling of all was the absence of human warnings about dangers that other species had never learned to detect on their own. 6 months after the humans vanished from galactic society, Trade Coordinator Velsereth stared at his computer screen with growing panic. The numbers made no sense at first glance, but after checking them 3 times, the horrible truth became clear. Cargo throughput across all major trade routes had dropped by 30% since human withdrawal, and the decline was accelerating every week. Velsereth belonged to the Altarian Commerce Guild, a species that had built their entire civilization around efficient trade and profit maximization. His people prided themselves on understanding market forces better than any other species in the galaxy. But the current situation defied every economic model they had developed over centuries of experience. The problem was not demand. Alien civilizations still needed the same goods and resources they had always imported and exported. Planets still required food, manufactured items, raw materials, and luxury products from across the galaxy. The mining operations continued producing ore and crystals. The agricultural worlds kept growing crops. The factory planets maintained their production schedules. What had disappeared was the reliable transportation network that moved all these goods from place to place. For 50 years, human shipping companies had dominated interstellar cargo transport, not through military force or political manipulation, but through simple competence. Human pilots knew the safest routes through dangerous regions. Human engineers maintained their ships better than anyone else. Human logistics coordinators could organize complex, multi-system deliveries with remarkable efficiency. Now that expertise was gone, and the alien companies trying to fill the gap were discovering just how difficult interstellar commerce really was. Captain Andy Clark had been the most successful human freight operator in the galaxy, moving everything from delicate Catherian artwork to dangerous hegemony weapons through space lanes that most pilots considered suicide runs. His ships had never lost a cargo container in 12 years of operation. The consortium of galactic shippers, formed by 6 different alien species, had taken over Clark's routes with great confidence. They possessed more ships than any human company and claimed superior technology. Within 3 months, they had lost 6 vessels to the same pirate groups that humans had somehow avoided for decades. The pirates had not become more numerous or better armed. If anything, they seemed less organized than before. But without human patrol ships providing intelligence reports and escort services, merchant vessels found themselves flying blind through regions where attacks had become routine. Insurance rates for cargo shipments increased by 400% almost overnight on former human research station Epsilon 7. Hegemony scientist Dr. Keth Vorlich struggled with equipment that seemed designed by aliens from another dimension. The station monitored gravitational anomalies in a region of space where normal physics behaved unpredictably. Ships that wandered too close to certain coordinates could be stretched apart by tidal forces or compressed into tiny balls of metal for 25 years. Human technicians had maintained the sensor arrays that detected these anomalies and warned passing vessels about safe navigation routes. The equipment itself was not particularly advanced by galactic standards, but operating it required knowledge that humans had never shared with other species. They had simply provided the warnings as a free service, asking nothing in return except basic courtesy. Dr. Keth Vorlich was considered one of the most brilliant scientists in hegemony space, with advanced degrees in physics, engineering, and xenotechnology. But after 6 months of trying to understand human sensor systems, he felt like a primitive savage attempting to operate a starship with stone tools. Every component seemed to connect to 3 other components in ways that made no logical sense. The software used programming languages that existed nowhere in galactic databases. Worse still, the sensors were beginning to fail without proper maintenance. Warning signals became less accurate each day as calibration drifted and components degraded. Ships were starting to receive navigation advisories that directed them into dangerous zones instead of away from them. 3 freighters had already been destroyed following outdated sensor data that no one knew how to correct. The first major disaster struck in the Proxima Trade Corridor, one of the busiest shipping lanes in the galaxy. A Vorthek diplomatic vessel, carrying trade negotiators from 4 different species, encountered a pirate fleet that should never have been able to approach undetected. For 30 years, human patrol ships had maintained regular security sweeps through the corridor, their advanced sensors able to spot hostile vessels long before they could threaten merchant traffic. The pirates had been operating in the region for decades, but human security forces had kept them contained to remote areas where they could only attack isolated targets. Without those patrols, the pirates grew bolder and began coordinating large-scale operations against high-value convoys. The Vorthek diplomatic ship was destroyed with all hands, taking with it several important trade agreements that had taken years to negotiate. Speaker Zelthan called an emergency council session to address the growing crisis, but the proposed solutions only highlighted how dependent the aliens had become on human services. The Altarians could provide more cargo ships, but their pilots lacked the experience to navigate dangerous routes safely. The Kithariana possessed advanced sensor technology, but their equipment was incompatible with existing navigation systems. The Hegemony offered to deploy military vessels for convoy protection, but their warships were designed for planetary conquest rather than anti-piracy operations. Their heavy cruisers moved too slowly to escort merchant fleets and consumed enormous amounts of fuel that made shipping costs prohibitively expensive. Worse, Hegemony military doctrine emphasized overwhelming firepower over the precise surgical strikes needed to deal with small pirate vessels hiding among asteroids and space debris. Meanwhile, deep in human space, President Lavra Stone reviewed intelligence reports from Director Mike Rogers with grim satisfaction. Alien communication intercepts revealed growing panic among government officials who were finally beginning to understand what they had lost. Supply shortages were appearing on planets that had never experienced resource problems. Trade disputes were escalating into military conflicts as species blamed each other for shipping failures. "They spent a century treating us like servants," Stone observed, watching data streams that showed the steady collapse of galactic commerce. "They never bothered to learn how we did our jobs because they assumed we would always be there to do them. And now they're discovering that being in charge means taking responsibility," Rogers replied, highlighting a report about Hegemony forces failing to protect their own supply convoys. "Unfortunately for them, responsibility requires competence." 2 years after humanity disappeared from galactic society, the Kepler sector had become a graveyard of failed ambitions and destroyed dreams. Admiral Kate Phillips watched the carnage through long-range sensors from humanity's new observation post beyond Pluto, her expression mixing satisfaction with professional disgust. The Hegemony had claimed the sector immediately after human withdrawal, boasting that their superior technology would triple mining output within 6 months. Instead, they had managed to destroy 3 separate installations through sheer incompetence. The first disaster occurred when Hegemony engineers attempted to modify human-designed extraction equipment without understanding how it worked. The resulting explosion vaporized an entire asteroid mining platform and killed over 2,000 workers. The second accident happened when they ignored human safety protocols for working near unstable gravitational fields, causing a mining ship to be torn apart by tidal forces that human crews had avoided for decades. The third catastrophe was the worst. Hegemony commanders decided that human environmental suits were too expensive and replaced them with cheaper alternatives that failed in the sector's harsh radiation environment. 400 miners died slowly from radiation poisoning while their superiors argued about who was responsible for the equipment failure. Dr. Rachel Torres, now heading humanity's Xenological Research Division, studied reports of alien technological regression with scientific fascination. Her team had been monitoring alien communications for 2 years, documenting the steady collapse of systems that had functioned perfectly under human management. The pattern was always the same. Aliens would take over human operations with great confidence, ignore existing procedures as primitive human nonsense, and then watch everything fall apart in spectacular fashion. They never learned our methods, Torres explained to President Stone during their weekly briefing. They only used our results. When we left, they lost 60 years of accumulated knowledge and experience. It's like giving a child a computer and expecting them to rebuild it when it breaks. The Vorthak had suffered the worst losses in deep space exploration. Their government had launched 12 expeditions into regions that human scouts had mapped safely for decades, confident that their advanced ships and superior navigation systems would succeed where humans had merely survived. Within 18 months, 6 of those expeditions had vanished completely, their ships presumably destroyed by the same spatial anomalies and navigational hazards that human crews had learned to avoid through hard experience. Captain Linda Hayes, now commanding humanity's new generation of vessels, reviewed the Vorthik distress signals with professional interest. The aliens had sophisticated computers and powerful engines, but they lacked the intuitive understanding of dangerous space that came from decades of actually working in those environments. Human pilots had developed techniques for reading gravitational distortions, predicting solar storm patterns, and identifying the subtle signs that warned of hidden dangers. The breaking point came when an unmonitored spatial anomaly tore through the Centauri shipping lanes like an invisible blade. The phenomenon was a gravity wave pulse, the kind of disturbance that human monitoring stations had tracked routinely for 30 years. These waves traveled faster than light and could be detected hours before they reached dangerous intensity, giving ships plenty of time to alter course or find shelter, but the human stations were gone, and the aliens had never learned to operate the early warning systems. 17 ships vanished in less than 10 minutes as the gravity wave twisted space itself into impossible shapes. Among the destroyed vessels was a council diplomatic transport carrying trade negotiators from 4 different species, including Speaker Zelthan's own nephew and 2 potential successors to major government positions. The disaster could have been prevented with 30 minutes of advance warning, the kind of alert that humans had provided automatically and without charge for decades. Instead, alien families mourned their dead while their governments scrambled to understand what had gone wrong and how to prevent it from happening again. Communication. Director Steve Parker monitored the flood of desperate messages arriving at the edge of human space. Every day brought new alien delegations broadcasting increasingly frantic pleas for assistance. The proud hegemony offered territorial concessions and tribute payments. The commerce-focused Altarians promised exclusive trade deals worth trillions of credits. Even the xenophobic Kithuriana hinted at sharing their most closely guarded technological secrets, but humanity's response remained politely uniform across all contacts. The United Earth government appreciates your message and concern for improved relations, came the standard reply that Parker's office transmitted to every alien request. However, we are currently focused on internal development projects and are not accepting external commitments at this time. We wish you success in resolving your current difficulties. Behind this diplomatic language lay humanity's transformed civilization. 2 years of complete isolation had produced technological advances that made their previous contributions to galactic society seem like primitive attempts at engineering. Dr. Torres had directed research programs that solved problems humans had worked on for centuries. Captain Hayes commanded ships that could outperform anything in alien fleets while using half the fuel and crew requirements. Most importantly, humanity had learned to see themselves not as junior partners in galactic civilization, but as the species that actually made galactic civilization possible. They had provided the shipping, the security, the technical expertise, and the problem-solving skills that kept dozens of alien worlds functioning. Without human contributions, the galaxy was reverting to the chaotic collection of isolated planets it had been before first contact. President Stone reviewed the final intelligence reports as she prepared for humanity's return to galactic affairs. The aliens had lost 60% of their interstellar commerce. Entire sectors lay abandoned because no one else knew how to navigate the dangers that humans had handled routinely. Piracy had reached epidemic proportions without human security. Forces maintaining order in the shipping lanes. "They're ready," Stone announced to her cabinet, watching streams of data that showed alien civilizations teetering on the edge of complete collapse. 2 years ago, they saw us as useful servants who should be grateful for any scraps they threw our way. Now they're about to discover what it means to need something they can't take by force. The time had come for humanity to return to the galaxy, but not as the subordinate species that had left in quiet dignity. They would return as the power that others could no longer survive without. 5 years after their withdrawal from galactic society, humanity emerged from isolation as masters of their own destiny. President Stone stepped aboard the flagship UES Endeavour, a vessel that represented everything humanity had accomplished during their time away from alien interference. The ship moved through space with impossible grace, its hull gleaming with materials that had never been seen before in the galaxy. Every system aboard the vessel represented technological advances that made Council ships look like museum pieces. From a forgotten age, Ambassador Jake Morrison stood on the bridge, wearing the same diplomatic uniform he had worn during humanity's final Council session years earlier. But everything else about him had changed. Gone was the tired frustration of a man fighting hopeless battles against alien arrogance. In its place stood the quiet confidence of someone who knew he held all the winning cards in a game the other. Players were desperate to join. The location for humanity's return to galactic affairs had been chosen with careful symbolism. They approached the coordinates where Human Research Station, Epsilon 7, had once monitored dangerous spatial anomalies, protecting thousands of ships from gravitational disasters. The station had been abandoned when humans left, and alien incompetence had led to 3 major catastrophes that killed over 40,000 beings, who might have lived if anyone had bothered to learn how human warning systems worked. The assembled alien fleet waiting for them represented every major species in the known galaxy. Their ships hung in space like beggars outside a palace, arranged in what could only be described as a formation of complete submission. Speaker Zelthan's vessel, once the symbol of galactic authority and alien superiority, looked primitive and clumsy beside the elegant human ship that seemed to bend space around itself as it moved. Captain Jennifer Walsh monitored alien communications. From her position at the sensor station, listening to the desperate chatter that filled their channels. The aliens had spent 5 years watching their civilization collapse without human expertise to hold it together. Trade had dropped by 70%. Entire sectors lay empty because no one else could navigate the hazards that human crews had. Handled routinely? Pirates controlled shipping lanes that had been safe for decades under human protection, Morrison's first words, carried across every alien vessel through communication systems that worked better than anything the Council possessed. The United Earth government is prepared to discuss limited cooperation agreements with interested parties. The emphasis on the word limited sent visible shock waves through the alien fleet as translators rendered the implications in dozens of different languages. The aliens had expected humanity to return as the same species that had left 5 years earlier, grateful for any opportunity to rejoin galactic society on whatever terms the Council chose to offer. Instead, they found themselves facing a civilization that spoke to them as equals at best, and more often as supplicants seeking favors from a superior power. Speaker Zelthan activated his communication system with hands that shook from age and desperation. The Galactic Council welcomes humanity's return to civilized space. He began, trying to maintain some dignity despite his obvious need. We are prepared to discuss restoration of your previous status and responsibilities within our established framework. Morrison's response came without hesitation or diplomacy. The United Earth government does not seek restoration of previous arrangements. We are offering selective service contracts to species that demonstrate proper appreciation for human expertise and fair compensation for our time. The words hit the alien fleet like physical blows. For centuries, the Council had operated on the assumption that they determined the terms of galactic relationships. Younger species earn their place through service and submission to established powers. The idea that humans might dictate terms to their former superiors seemed to violate the natural order of the universe, but the natural order had changed during humanity's absence. The hegemony had lost half their deep space territories to pirates and navigational disasters. The Altarians faced economic collapse as their trade networks crumbled without reliable shipping. The Vorthak had watched 6 exploration fleets vanish into regions that humans had mapped safely for decades. Even the proud Cytheriana found their crystal technology useless without the human engineers who had maintained their most critical systems. Morrison presented humanity's terms with the casual confidence of someone discussing the weather. Human shipping companies would resume operations in selected systems, but as independent contractors charging market rates plus hazard pay. Human security forces would provide convoy protection and anti-piracy services for a premium that reflected their unique capabilities. Human technical specialists would maintain critical systems that aliens had proven unable to operate safely. Most importantly, humanity would retain exclusive control over their advanced technology. No more free sharing of human innovations with species that had treated such gifts as natural tribute from an inferior civilization. Aliens who wanted access to human expertise would pay for it like any other commodity. The terms were harsh by the standards of the old galactic order, but the aliens had no choice except to accept them. Speaker Zelthan signed agreements that would have been unthinkable 5 years earlier, granting humans territorial concessions and exclusive mining rights in exchange for basic services that kept his civilization functioning. The hegemony offered 3 star systems in return for human assistance in reclaiming territories lost to pirates. The Altarians promised 50% of their profits from trade routes that only human pilots could navigate safely. The Cytheriana, most surprising of all, requested human advisors to help them understand their own technology that had stopped working properly without human maintenance. As Morrison concluded the negotiations, he allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. Humanity had learned the galaxy's most valuable lesson through their years of exile and rebuilding. Sometimes the most powerful word in any language was simply no. They had left in silence when the aliens dismissed their contributions as worthless. They had rebuilt in isolation while their former masters discovered how much they actually needed human expertise to survive. Now they returned not as the grateful servants the aliens expected, but as the civilization that others could no longer live without. The galaxy had taught humanity that cooperation was weakness, so humanity had learned to stand alone. In mastering that lesson, they had discovered they were strong enough to stand above everyone else. The great game of galactic politics had new rules, and humanity held all the cards that mattered. Never again would human patience be mistaken for weakness or human cooperation taken for granted. The species that had once begged for acceptance now found themselves in the position of granting it to others, and they intended to remember every lesson their former masters had taught them about the proper use of power.